Hello, and welcome back to Resilient Walk. If you found your way here today, perhaps you're carrying something heavy. Maybe it's the weight of a mistake that keeps replaying in your mind, or the quiet ache of feeling like you're never quite enough. That voice that whispers you should be better, do better, be better. Before we begin our story together, if you find even a moment of peace in these next few minutes, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video and join our quiet community by subscribing. Now, settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Take a breath. Let's travel together to a small coastal village where the scent of salt air mingles with linseed oil, and where an old painter named Clara has spent 15 years capturing light on canvas. Clara's art studio overlooked the harbor like a lighthouse watching over ships. For 4 decades, her brushes had danced with color the way waves dance with shore. She could see light that others missed, the way morning sun turned ordinary buildings into cathedrals, how storm clouds held purple secrets, the exact shade of hope in a child's eyes. The villagers treasured her paintings. Wedding portraits that captured not just faces but love itself, seascapes so real you could hear the waves, portraits of their children that seemed to breathe with life. Clara's art was woven into their hearts and homes. But this year, something had gone terribly wrong. Every canvas Clara touched seemed to turn to mud. Colors that once sang together now clashed in ugly discord. Her steady hand trembled, leaving unwanted streaks across carefully planned compositions. Even simple sketches, drawings she could create without thinking, emerged distorted and lifeless. Clara would stand before her easel each morning, her stomach knotted with dread. The paints felt foreign on her brush now, as if they no longer trusted her intentions. She'd spend hours trying to capture a simple sunset, watching the colors turn muddy and flat, mocking her decades of skill. 15 years, she whispered to her empty studio one dawn, staring at another ruined canvas. 15 years, and I've forgotten how to paint light. The commissions began piling up. The mayor's wife wanted her portrait finished. The local cafe needed their new mural completed. Children brought their pets, expecting Clara to work the magic she was known for. But Clara's brushes, once sure as compass needles, now wavered with self-doubt. She started making excuses. The paints were of poor quality. The canvas was wrong. The light wasn't right. Anything but the truth, that the master painter no longer trusted herself to touch brush to canvas without destroying it. At night, Clara lay awake cataloging every failed stroke, every muddy color, every painting that emerged lifeless from her studio. The questions circled relentlessly. What was wrong with her? Had she lost her gift? Was she fooling herself to think she'd ever been able to see beauty at all? She began avoiding the village square, taking back alleys to the art supply shop, her head down like a woman carrying shame instead of paint stains on her fingers. The studio that had once felt like sanctuary now felt like a courtroom where she was both judge and condemned. By autumn, Clara's studio had become a graveyard of abandoned paintings. Canvases lined the walls like windows into failure, half-finished seascapes with muddy water, portraits with eyes that held no life, landscapes that captured nothing of the beauty she once saw everywhere. That's when young Emma appeared. Emma was 9 years old, with paint perpetually under her fingernails and eyes that sparkled with the kind of wonder that sees magic in puddles. Her grandmother had sent her to Clara's studio to collect a commissioned landscape, but when she arrived, Clara had to admit the truth. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice rough with shame. "I couldn't finish your grandmother's painting. Everything I touched turns ugly." Emma studied the abandoned canvases with the intensity of an art critic. "Can I see them?" she asked softly. Clara reluctantly showed her a seascape she'd been struggling with for weeks, one where the colors had turned muddy and the waves looked more like gray sludge than water. "It's ruined," she said. "Worthless." Emma tilted her head, looking at the painting from different angles. "It's not ugly," she whispered. "It looks like the sea during that big storm last month. Remember how angry and beautiful it was? Like it was feeling everything at once." That evening, disaster struck in the most unexpected way. Clara was attempting to salvage one last piece, a simple study of morning light that represented everything she used to be able to capture without effort. But as she added what she hoped would be the final brushstroke, her hand shook with desperation, and a streak of dark paint slashed across the delicate work. The painting was destroyed. Weeks of careful work obliterated by a single, uncontrolled mark. And with that dark line across her canvas, that final, definitive mistake, something inside Clara broke completely. She sank into her paint-stained chair, surrounded by months of failures, and began to weep. Deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from the very palate of her soul. This was her rock bottom. the place where perfection goes to die. As her tears fell onto the ruined painting, Clara noticed something strange. Where the salt water touched the canvas, the paint began to shift and blend in unexpected ways. The harsh black streak softened, creating shadows she hadn't planned, depths she hadn't intended. And in that moment of complete surrender, she remembered Emma's words, like it was feeling everything at once. The next morning, Clara did something she hadn't done in months. Instead of approaching her easel with dread, she came with curiosity. But first, she sat with the ruined painting from the night before and really looked at it. For the first time, she saw not just the mistake, but the emotion it contained. The dark streak wasn't destruction, it was feeling made visible. The muddy colors weren't failures, they were the complex truth of stormy weather, of difficult days, of the full spectrum of human experience. Clara had spent her entire career trying to capture perfect light, pristine beauty, idealized moments. But life wasn't always golden, our sunsets and laughing children. Sometimes life was storms and tears and muddy colors. What if her failures weren't failures at all? What if they were her most honest paintings yet? That day, Clara made a radical decision. Instead of throwing away her months of ruined work, she would honor each canvas exactly as it was. She gathered her muddy seascapes, her imperfect portraits, her difficult paintings, and began to study them with new eyes. She stopped fighting the colors and started listening to them. She embraced the streaks and smudges, working with them instead of against them. She painted not just the beauty she wished to see, but the truth she actually felt. As she worked, something magical began to happen. The paintings didn't become perfect. They became more real than perfection ever could be. The muddy seascapes captured the raw power of nature. The imperfect portraits revealed the complex humanity in her subjects' faces. The difficult colors told stories of resilience, of survival, of the courage to feel deeply in a world that often hurts. Clara discovered that she had been holding her brush like a weapon, trying to control every outcome. Now, she painted with an open heart, offering her skill and accepting what flowed through her, beauty and struggle alike. The villagers began to notice. Not just the changed paintings, but something different about Clara herself. She moved through her studio with a new kind of grace, not the rigid perfectionism she'd once demanded, but something more fluid and forgiving. By winter, Clara's studio had transformed into something entirely new. The walls once lined with abandoned failures now displayed paintings of breathtaking honesty, each imperfection integrated into the whole, each mistake celebrated as part of the story. Young Emma visited every day after school, and Clara began teaching her to paint, but not the rigid, perfectionist technique she had once practiced. She taught her to trust the paint, to work with happy accidents, to see beauty in the unexpected. "Look," she told her one afternoon, pointing to a smudge in Emma's landscape where her sleeve had dragged through wet paint. "This mark happened because you were so excited you forgot to watch your arm. But see how it looks like mist rising from a valley? Sometimes our eagerness creates the most beautiful surprises." Emma nodded solemnly, understanding in the way children do that they were talking about more than just painting. Clara realized that her greatest fear, being seen as a flawed artist, had been her greatest teacher. The months of struggle had cracked her open, and through those cracks, something truer had emerged. She was still the same painter, but now she painted with compassion instead of control, with acceptance instead of anxiety. The commissions returned, but they were different now. People didn't just want Clara's technical skill, they wanted her emotional truth. They brought their own difficult stories, asking her to paint not just their faces, but their journeys. Not just their houses, but their homes. Not just their celebrations, but their full, complex lives. Clara welcomed them all, sharing what she had learned, that the most beautiful art emerges not from flawless technique, but from the courage to paint what is real. The mayor's wife came for her portrait, but instead of requesting idealized perfection, she asked Clara to paint her as she truly was. Laugh lines, worry creases, the silver threads in her hair that told stories of wisdom earned through living. The cafe owners commissioned their mural, but they wanted it to reflect not just their town's beauty, but its character. The weathered dock that had seen countless storms, the lighthouse that had guided ships through darkness, the faces of neighbors who had supported each other through hard times. Clara's studio became known throughout the region, not as the place for perfect paintings, but as the place where truth was transformed into beauty. People traveled for miles to learn her techniques, but more than that, to learn her philosophy, that our imperfections aren't flaws to hide, they're the brushstrokes that make our story uniquely ours. And Clara herself? She moved through the world differently now. Her hands were steady but gentle, confident but surrendered. She had learned the secret that transforms everything. Perfection isn't the highest art, authenticity is. Perhaps, like Clara, you've been approaching your own life like a canvas that must be perfect, terrified of any mark that might mar the image you're trying to create. Perhaps you've been so focused on the mistakes that you've missed the masterpiece they're helping to create. The truth Clara discovered, the truth her ruined paintings taught her, is this: your imperfections aren't flaws to be painted over. They're the brushstrokes that give your story depth and dimension. They're the beautiful evidence of a life fully lived, fully felt. That harsh inner voice that tells you you're not enough? It's been trying to protect you from judgment, but it's actually been protecting you from the most beautiful part of being human. The part that dares to create despite the risk of making mistakes. The part that finds the courage to show your true colors even when they're not always pretty. Your struggles aren't signs of your failure. They're proof of your willingness to engage with life. They're the honest brushstrokes that tell the story of your courage. Today, I invite you to pick up the brush of your own story with Clara's gentle hands. To look at your difficulties not as evidence of your inadequacy, but as the raw material for something unexpectedly beautiful. To see your imperfections not as flaws, but as the unique signature of an artist brave enough to paint from the heart. You are not a ruined canvas. You are a masterpiece in progress, and every mistake is simply another layer of depth in the beautiful complexity of who you are. Thank you for walking with me today. If this story brought you even a moment of peace, please share it with someone who might need to hear that their imperfections are exactly what make them a work of art. And remember, in the gallery of your life, you are both the artist and the painting. Paint with compassion for both. Take care and rest well.